So today I want to talk about the HEDD D1 and compare it against the Focal Clear right here. Now these are headphones that have been out for a little bit now, more recently the HEDD D1, and I've reviewed both of them, but we have some new evaluative methods and techniques here that I want to use to put these to the test to show you guys some new information that you probably haven't seen before. Well, you definitely haven't seen before. And importantly, this new way of testing headphones shows us why we hear them the way that we do. So let's get into it. So what am I talking about here? I am talking, of course, about all the new stuff that we've been doing with in-ear microphones and on-head testing for human data. And as I've said in other videos, we are diving deep into measuring headphones on our actual heads. We've done several videos on this and the process that it took to get here. But in short, because we went to a lab in the UK to measure our head-related transfer functions, so how our anatomy impacts sound, and understand how our heads and ears are filtering the sound, essentially, we can get a better picture using in-ear microphones of how headphones are actually performing on our own heads, rather than just relying on the measurement rigs, the industry standard rigs that we also use here on this channel. So if you are interested in more of this kind of information or more data on this, consider subscribing to the Headphone Show. You can also drop a like if you found any of this useful. And if you subscribe to the channel, that's a signal that you guys actually want this information, and it helps me be able to dedicate more time to doing this kind of stuff. So if you find this interesting or valuable, hit that subscribe button. It does a lot for us. Okay, so just a general overview of these two headphones. They're both dynamic driver open back headphones, and they come in at a similar price tag, at least in North America. I believe the Focal Clear is actually discontinued, but this is where headphones.com has an exclusive on it in North America, and the price is significantly less. So that makes the HEDD D1, I think, actually a little bit more expensive in North America. But either way, they're in a similar ballpark for the price, and they're both open back headphones that are reasonably well received by the community, and I have a clear preference for one of these. Clear preference, pun intended. Nah, it wasn't intended. I'd be lying if I said it was intended. But pretend it's intended, because that makes this more fun. Anyways, I have a favorite. I have a preference between these two. But you might not share that opinion, and it's worth understanding why. Why, good sir? Tell me why. Okay, so the Focal Clear is all about that sense of dynamism and impact, that physicality, that gumption down low. The balls. This one has the balls, all right? It's got that kick to it. And the HEDD D1 is all about refinement and timbre and clarity. The D1 is more clear than the Clear. Think about that for a second. It's a more clear sounding headphone. And subjectively, I would say that the D1 has fewer colorations, whereas the Clear has more flair to it, more colorations going on here. Now, I want to move over to the measurements that I've done here on the B&K 5 and 2.8, and I've also done the measurements on the Gross 43AG systems, and then I'm going to switch over to the on-head data. Now, I know what you guys are thinking, measurements aren't everything, and that's true for the way that you had originally come to learn about measurements and equate that to your experience. That's true. Those measurements are not everything. There is more to sound quality than what you see on a graph. But what I will show you in this video is the rest of it. Okay, so taking a look at the industry standard measurements for these two headphones, you can see basically the description that I gave before. The Clear is bassier, it's got more gumption down low, and it has some more coloration throughout the treble. It's a bit darker in the treble. I think the key criticisms that people have of the Clear, and I share these criticisms, is that it's a bit on the intimate side of things, and there's a bit of rocky, grittier treble. But you'll notice some of these peaks here in the mid treble with the Clear. I want you to remember that, because we're going to come back to that in a moment. With the D1, it's not quite as bass elevated, but it's quite a bit more linear and smooth throughout the entirety of the rest of the response. And it doesn't have that forward characteristic at around like 1.5 kilohertz, 1.4 kilohertz that you found in the Clear. And it's a bit brighter overall, so it doesn't lean quite as dark throughout the rest of the treble as the Clear does. Overall, this is a more, let's say, timbrely normal kind of sound signature. And I think that's what we can expect from these two. That's how most people are going to hear them. Let's move over to the on-head data. And this is where things get interesting. And again, I have to stress that this isn't necessarily about like recontextualizing the way that headphones sound. This is more an explanation as to the missing pieces. So why do things sound the way that they do? And I think a key criticism of the D1 is that there are a couple spots in the treble that could come across a little bit on the spicy side, like maybe in the upper treble, or for some people it might be around 7 kilohertz. I saw a video from DMS actually where I believe it's lower down. I think it's at like 5 kilohertz. There are some reports of a couple of stabbies and zingies in the treble on the D1 that isn't quite as obvious here when looking at the industry standard headphone measurement data. So now let's move over to the on on-head data, again, captured within your microphones. And the process by which we do this is we have our HRTFs and we've subtracted that from the measurements. So this gives you a picture of how the headphones themselves are actually behaving in situ when they're being worn on our own heads. So this is genuinely what we're hearing. So there is no gap here or usual caveats that exist with the measurement rig isn't your own head, the measurement ear is, the rig's ear is different from your ear, all that kind of stuff. This is using my actual head and my actual ears, and everybody's individual heads and ears are going to be different. And this is where I also have to stress that with on-head human data, we're getting individualized results. With measurement rigs, we're getting results based on average anthropometric anatomical features that go into the data sets for the ear and for the head and all of that kind of stuff. So let's take a look at the Focal Clear. And you can see that wideband, the features generally track the same. I believe that on my head, I'm actually getting a little bit less bass on the Clear than I get with using the industry standard measurement equipment. The 1.4 kilohertz feature still tracks. The treble is still a little bit darker, but notice where those peaks in the treble are. There is still a peak there at around 6 kilohertz for me, but it's not nearly as intense as what it looks like on the measurement rig. In fact, the overall treble, while it's a bit dark and a bit rocky there, it doesn't look quite as spiky and aggressive. Rather, that seems to show up more towards the upper treble. So around 10 kilohertz, 11 kilohertz. For the colorations that exist with this headphone, we're getting a little bit more bass, we're getting a little bit of a feature in the mids, some darker mid and low treble, and then a bit more intense, or quite a bit more intense upper treble on my head. And I believe that when you can understand all of these features and how they relate to one another, taken as a whole, you can understand what contributes to the effects that you're experiencing with your music. So this gives you a picture of why does it sound this way. Okay, so one example might be, for me, the Clear sounds very impactful, yes, but also on the intimate side of things. If you compare how the performance is for this to something like a Sennheiser HD800 or HD800S, it's kind of like the opposite. Those headphones and other soundstagey headphones tend to have a dip in that 1 to 2 kilohertz range and then more forward presence in the treble above that. And the Clear, yeah, it's the opposite, and that creates the sense of intimacy. I'd previously noted that I found the Clear to be a little bit on the gritty side for the treble, and I think this also explains why. Now, let's move over to the D1, and you can see that the D1 is not as bassy, and we expected this, but on-head results show that it is not that different. This is only about a 2 to 3 dB difference between the D1 and the Clear. Let me just double check this. No, that's a 2 dB difference at most between the Clear and the D1 and the bass. For a fairly wide range of the response, so the Clear definitely sounds bassier, but a core reason why the Clear has more of that sort of intensity down low is because of the relationship between the bass and the rest of the response, where the D1 is notably brighter. It's notably more balanced and neutral and linear for the mid treble, low treble, and upper treble. Now, one thing to note, this dotted line is just a bass to treble delta. This is not the specific preference bounds for me. This is just a very rough estimate. Expect that to change. But either way, you can kind of see what I'm talking about as far as how these headphones sound and perform relative to one another. And the key differences that you saw in the industry standard data also show up in the on-head results, even though there are some differences. So there are some places where you don't see the same features, or you see the features in slightly different spots. That's because my ear is not the same ear as the ear used on the measurement fixture. And this is to be expected. So when people sometimes ask me about this, they say, what's the point of any measurements if my head and ears is going to be impacting the sound differently from what you see with the measurement rig? Doesn't the fact that everybody have a unique HRTF eliminate the point of headphone measurements? And the answer was no, because even though you can see some subtle differences, there are way more similarities than there are differences. So just because measurements done on industry standard rigs are imperfect because they're not your head and ears, that doesn't make them useless. That doesn't make them pointless. And one of the things that I want to highlight with this kind of testing, this kind of demonstrates the need for giving both objective, so measurement rig based information, and subjective information, because they can differ. In the past, I would have reviewed something saying, here's how it measures on the measurement rig, but I hear it like this, or I hear a peak here, or I don't hear this peak that the measurement rig shows. Now, I don't need to just tell you that. I can show you that as well. And that's where this is super useful. So with that said, I do have a clear preference between the two of these, and that preference is for the D1. It should come as no surprise. But that doesn't mean that everybody is going to prefer the D1, because the bass on the Clear is a ton of fun. So if you want that blam effect, that sense of impact, the Clear is really still one of the best at that. It hits ridiculously hard. And yes, there are some tonal quirks and colorations and timbral compromises that the D1 doesn't have, but that's the sacrifice that you make for that sense of impact. As an EQ platform, the D1 is also quite a bit better because it doesn't have an excursion limit. The Clear has an excursion limit at 107 dB at 1 kilohertz. You're not going to notice that if you're just listening normally, but if you run it out of a high output impedance source, or if you are EQing up the bass to the high heavens, you're going to cause it to clip, going to make it go zzz, and that's not fun for anybody. The D1 doesn't have this problem. So for me, with the D1, when I was just doing my live stream comparing these two recently in the members stream, I kept going back and forth between the two and going through my test tracks, and it just was so obvious how important that timbral cohesion is that I get from the D1, like that sense of naturalness and clarity and normalness, and just, I described it in the member stream as like a breath of fresh air, and that's what it is. And comparing the two, it almost makes the Clear sound a little bit congested because it's darker in the rest of the treble there. Like that kind of intimacy that the Clear gives you, the D1 doesn't have that intimacy. It's more of that just sort of like, you know, the veil is lifted with the D1, and I really value that with the music that I listen to. So that is how I feel about these two headphones. I feel that the D1 is the better sounding one, but there are things that I like about the Clear. It's just that with the Clear, there are too many compromises, and the D1 compromises less. It's also more comfortable and easier to wear for long periods of time. Not to say the Clear is uncomfortable. But speaking of compromises, if you want to see how the rest of us on our team have rated both of these headphones, you can do so at the ranking list up on headphones.com. I'll leave that linked in the description, where you can see an averaged ranking of how all three of us have ranked these headphones, or you can go to individual lists if you think this Resolve guy, I hate what he says about headphones and I don't hear anything the way he does. There are others of us who have ranked these headphones as well, so check those out. And that's going to do it for this video. As always, you can chat with me in our forum at forum.headphones.com or in the Discord, also linked below. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Bye for now.